right, I wanted to give some background into our theory of fun, my theory of fun specifically, and the sententia approach and why we take this approach. So, to give you some background, if you remember all the way back in level one, all the way back to level one, and we had you start right off the bat with your crew saying, what games did you play as a child? And the idea and the lesson at the time was sometimes what you find as fun is not necessarily what they find as fun. And so that's where, if you remember the story, I told about my sister who loved the game of life. She just loved the game of life. She could play it over and over again. The car would get to the end. She'd take those little pegs out. Well, I hated the game of life because there was nothing I could do to make sure she lost. There was nothing I could do to make sure she lost. There was no strategy. It was all based on that stupid spinner. And I don't know if you remember that spinner go flying off the peg across the room all the time. The board doesn't change. Everything's the same. My game was Othello, and I still love the tagline, "A minute to learn, a lifetime to master." This was a game that I could study. This game I could strategize. If she does this, I'll do that. And then if she does this, I'll do that. I could ensure that she would lose every time. So, of course, she quit playing with me. And eventually my friends quit playing with me. And yes, I was the nerd that, that played against himself. I'd play the whites, turn the board, play the blacks, and so on. But the point is, why was I attracted to one of these games and she was not? And what made life fun for her and what made Othello fun for me? So that's where we come up to the self-hugging, if you remember self-hugging. We tend to create learning experiences that we enjoy, not what they enjoy, but what we enjoy. And this is where we get in trouble because if I were designing for her, what would happen is she would hit a fail state very, very quickly. She would she'd feel badly about herself and her abilities and would leave. If, on the other hand, she were designing for me, I would get bored very quickly. I would check out. I can read the board faster than we can do gameplay. Nothing's going to change, and so on. So this is what comes up with my new theory of fun. A new theory of fun, and specifically the book, Deliberate Fun, because there's something inside of that game that appeals to her and something inside this game that appeals to me. And so that's where I turned to my work with Dr. Stephen Rees. And to give you some background on him, you did hear this before, but I want to restate it for our purposes here. It might have been a long time since you took the level 1 certification. But for Dr. Rees, it really was a deathbed realization. Traditionally, in the field of psychology, we think that why we do something is because we're trying to either avoid pain or pursuing pleasure. And back in the late 1990s, Dr. Rees had an autoimmune disease, and he was in the ICU for weeks on end, for well over 5 weeks. And he was laying there thinking about his condition and was saying, well, why do I choose to stay alive? Why do I choose to stay alive? Because it certainly is not to avoid pain, because he's under tremendous amounts of pain. As he tells it, his skin was actually green. That's how much bad his condition was. So just tremendous amounts of pain. So it wasn't about avoiding pain. And so what he realized it was that he wanted his sons to have a father as they grew up. So there might be some future pleasure in that, being with his sons at the stages of life, going to the ball games and so on. But there's nothing right in this moment that's pursuing pleasure. And then he was thinking about his ICU nurses, and in his words, he said only a sadist would get any pleasure out of this job because they're around death and extreme suffering and stressed out family members and body fluids, hanging out, dealing with all these body fluids. So it wasn't for pleasure, and you could say, well, they need a job, but there's plenty of other jobs out there that don't require the long hours and dealing with death and body fluids. So he eventually recovered, and he went out with this question, and he and his assistant did this massive study. So there's over 80,000 people from across 4 continents, cultures across 4 continents. And what they did initially is they took 578 different things that they found in all the literature and whatever they could come up with that motivates people. They got that whittled down to 323. And then they started putting it into the computer, started doing factor analysis. Eventually got this down to 15 core desires. The 16th was added after a scientific review. So there's been dozens of peer-reviewed articles to support his work, and it is used as a predictor of behavior. If we know your motivational profile, we can predict what decisions you'll make, what actions you'll take. And the U.S. Military uses a version of the Reese motivational profile to predict who's likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So I forgot to say, it is Stephen Reese came up with the first empirically based taxonomy of human needs and desires. Right? So that's what this study is the first and only. Yes, there are different personalities, things out there, profile that you can take. Those do not have a scientific backing, a basis. There are some people observe some things, they come up with some questions, put them together. They can't be scientifically replicated over time. So again, what Dr. Stephen Reese did that hadn't been done and still has not been done is an empirically based taxonomy of human needs and desires. So you'll become familiar with this. We'll be going through. You have the opportunity to take the Reese motivation profile, and you'll have some good explanations on these in the attachment that you'll get with it. For here, in case you haven't gone through it yet, haven't had your half hour with me, each of us have these 16 core desires. What makes you different from me and you different from your learners is the emphasis you put on any one of these. So in the middle here, between the what's in orange and these vertical lines, visualize a bell curve going through the middle there. Okay, so whenever we study humans, this is what we typically run into, some sort of bell curve. Most people, the majority of the folks, will be within one deviation point from the mean, and then we'll get down to roughly 10%. By the time we get out to three division points, that statistically irrelevant. Those people are statistically irrelevant. But no, I shouldn't say it that way. But anyway, the point is where this person is on the right side in the dark blue, she wants more of this than 80% of the data set. Where she's in the light blue, she wants less of this than 80% of the data set. And so that's what makes us who we are. That's what brings our personality. We will make decisions based on these differences. So for instance, I'll just use social contact here. Social contact is the desire for peer companionship, so hanging out with your peers. So some people will have more of this and some people will have less of this. So what happens is if life gives us, before the pandemic, hopefully by now, by the time you're watching this, you'll have 8 hours of contact with your peers during the day. So while you're at work, you have 8 hours of contact. Somebody who wants more than 8 hours will show up in the blue side of there. So they'll cause them to do certain things with their behaviors. So their behavior, the 8 hours isn't enough. So they'll go to happy hour, they'll hang out with their friends on the weekends and so on. And then of course, people who want less than 8 hours, hanging out creates a lot of stress and problems for them. And you might remember the story I said in level 1 about the guy who they couldn't fire him. They stuck him in a trailer because he smelled so badly. So he learned some traits. He learned some things that he could do that would push people away so they wouldn't want to hang out with him. They wouldn't want to talk to him. So he smelled, he was rude, and he was crude. Versus someone on the sociable side, they're going to be personable. They're going to care about what they look like, and they'll actually shower and bathe and have a sense of humor and so on to make it easier for people to interact with them. So when we talk about this, to take this down to another level that we didn't get to in level 1, certification, is when you hear about social contact, you right away go to extroversion. You say, oh, people who are sociable must be extroverted. So what happens is these core desires, so our 16 core desires, create or display different traits, different personality traits. Now, we don't believe in styles. They're not, like I said, not scientifically valid. And what are valid and studyable is traits. So when we study, for instance, the trait of extroversion, we find that most people are within one deviation point. There are some true extroverts, but only about 10% of the population, and true introverts, again, same thing, about 10 to 20% of the population. About 2/3 of people are right there in the middle, just one deviation point. So, and you'll get that. You'll talk to an extrovert. So, but like I said, what is scientifically valid is the five personality traits. I think there's enough. I've added honesty and humility here. And then what's also changing is the term neuroticism is being changed to emotionality. So in the scientific literature, I believe we will have I think what's coming up, the Hexad or whatever they're calling it, but they have the big 6 coming up. So anyway, when we look at the trait of extroversion, of course, social contact would be part of this. So of course we'd have social contact. And, but there's other things that would also lead to displaying extroversion. So, I should pause there. With social contact, the reason, because I want to hang out with people more than 8 hours a day, that's what's causing me to display extroversion as a trait. And when you look at my life, if a scientist were looking at me and how I display extroversion, my thing is I have these really intense times. So it's not constant contact with people, but there's this intensity. So it is different. There's different aspects of any of these traits. So anyway, status, if I'm highly motivated by status, I will display extroversion because you are the one who recognizes my status, my level. So that needs to come from somebody else. Also, we might have acceptance. So people who have a high desire for acceptance, they show extroversion so that people will like them and will accept them. Beauty, at some point, if you were looking for a date, you had to be extroverted to be able to go out on a date and interact with somebody that you may not have known very well. And then power, there's a recent study looking at women CEOs in very large companies, and sure enough, they had the core desire for power, and they displayed extroversion as a trait. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the idea here of what the point is. Our core desires cause us to behave in certain ways, or in this case, display certain traits. So let's go to the theory of fun. Let's get down to that. And so what makes this fun for my sister, this fun for me? And as my theory of fun is that what makes a game mechanic fun is that it appeals to at least one of these core desires. So my sister's motivational profile will cause her to enjoy the game of life, and it'll cause me not to enjoy it. So that's why it's important that we, first of all, understand who we are, and that's what we're doing here in the level 2, is because you will be identifying where your blind spots might be, because you think everybody's going to be motivated by curiosity because of self-hugging, and it turns out most of your learners probably are not motivated by by curiosity. So again, looking at these, I'm just going to go through good old points, badges, leaderboards, and show you how this works. So if we just take points, people with a high desire for power might like points because if they're difficult to get, they're starting on this journey, because a high desire for power, besides leadership, is also overcoming your environment. And so points might demonstrate that, look how hard I'm working. high desire for points, high desire for acceptance would be different. It's a different approach, but with acceptance, they're afraid that they're doing something wrong, that they're not achieving what they should be achieving. They have a lot of fear that they're letting other people down. Well, points is a method for demonstrating to them that they're on the right path. They are making an achievement. Perhaps order, if again it's given out in a specific way and so on, so that there's an ordered approach through this journey. And so points demonstrate you started here, you did this, you got to that. But really, that's about it when it comes to points. Points aren't very exciting. They're really more about accounting and than they are about actual gameplay. So think of badges, same thing. People have a high desire for savings, love badges because it's something they can collect. It's something they can gather because they just love collecting things, and badges is a method for doing that. Status. If depending on how the badges are distributed, if everybody gets a badge, no, that's not not good. But if this is a specific badge that you had to achieve something to have it, then they will like it as long as they have it, not everybody else does. And to make sure that they have that they can display it, that people know they have this badge. So again, it needs to be a scarcity of badges. Unlike acceptance, where with acceptance, a badge is that old giving everybody giving everybody a badge, giving everybody a ribbon. It's like, hey, thanks for coming to work today. Here's a badge. Here's a badge. So it's a way of us acknowledging them and what they've accomplished. And then leaderboards, turns out leaderboards, not a lot of folks. Course status, if you look at me, I'm at the top of the leaderboard. I'm up here with the cool kids. Y'all's a bunch of losers. And so leaderboards, but what's interesting, I've recently done some examination of this, and a leaderboard may actually push status people away if they are being compared to people that they don't consider worth being compared to. Right? If you're number one for but anyway, so there appears to be something different there. So, but for the most part, let's just say status people like leaderboards. And similarly, power, because it allows me to move up the leaderboard. So I used to be at 10. I did a bunch of hard work. I got up to 8. If I do some more hard work, I can keep pushing up, and pushing up. And then the people who really like it are high vengeance people, because high vengeance people, now they can see exactly who they need to sabotage. Because for high vengeance people, it's not about winning, it's about watching you die. Right? So it's more than just a straight competition. And so it's finding out who are their competitors, and then making sure that they get some eye drops in their coffee, so they get the runs. Make sure they don't get this memo, this email, let air out of their tires so they can't get to work on time. Things like that. That's what makes leaderboards fun for them, because they can see who they need to push down to be able to move up. And the reason you may not like leaderboards is because there's a statistical improbability, but the people who go through level 2, been a bunch of you, so I have a lot of data, turns out across the board, y'all are low vengeance. All right. Turns out people in the L&D world are pretty nice. People going through our courses are pretty nice. When I wrote the book, 73% of folks at that point were low vengeance. I started to lose track recently, so I want to redo a count, but it'll just take me a little bit of time. But as of now, as time of recording this, only 45 people have had a high desire for vengeance. I am one of those. So of all the dozens and dozens, perhaps hundreds by this point, hundreds and hundreds by this point, who have gone through this experience, do not appreciate vengeance, probably don't appreciate leaderboards. So that if you just think about that, look at yourself, that's an interesting statistic right there. So the point here that I wanted in this video is to give you some background of, first of all, the Reese motivational profile in the first place, but also why it's important to the Sententia model, and then ultimately why you're going to use it to determine what your learners are going to enjoy, what they find as fun. It might not be what you find as fun. You like you like taking courses, you like learning. They not so much. And so that's where we want to keep this in mind. All right, so let's move on to figuring out learner personas.